Welcome to the College Football Survivor Show, where playoff survival is always on the line. Here are your co-hosts, Doug Lesmerises and Shehan Jeyarajah. And we're back. Doug and Shehan on the College Football Survivor Show. And Shehan, it's a football show. It's a playoff show where you're continuing to play off the basketball tournament because that's what's going on. That's what's happening. And I want it. I want what they have. I want Fairleigh Dickinson. I want Princeton. I want St. Peter's. I want UMBC. I didn't know if I wanted it for college football. It maybe took me some time to come around to it, but I definitely want it now. And that's what we're going to talk about on this episode of the College Football Survivor Show. We're going to look to the 12-team playoff and ask, can we, will we, when will we get the college football equivalent or as close as we can get to what we saw with number 1 Purdue losing to number 16 seed Fairleigh Dickinson in the first round of the NCAA basketball tournament, number 15 Princeton beating number 2 Arizona. We're going to go through the history of it, Shehan. I always wonder about this again. Am I just stupid and I don't realize things, even though this is supposedly my job? But I surprised myself a little bit, double checking the research on some of this stuff. So I want to start here. We're going to go through and we're going to ask the question, how and when will we get that style of upset in a 12-team playoff? And let's start with when. And that style of upset, right, for now means 12 beating 5. Because it's going to be a 12-team playoff. The top 4 seeds get byes. 5-12 is going to be our football equivalent of 116. When do you think we will get the first 12 seed beating a 5 seed in the college football playoff?
So I want to go back to one thing that you said first. You said that you wanted a St. Peter's, you want a Fairleigh Dickinson, you want a Princeton. Sounds like Rutgers has got to step up, man. They got to put on for New Jersey, because you know what? Like, these New Jersey schools coming out here with their baseball bats, beating everybody over the head. I mean, that's what we need in here. We need some people who are going to cause some problems. But so I actually think that there's a good analog to this, right? So people always talk about that 5-12 matchup. And there is actually a specific reason why that ends up being such a good bet. And that reason is that when you look at the way that the tournament is seeded, typically the 11 line is the last line of at-larges. And once you get to the 12 seed, you're talking about teams that earned auto bids by winning conference tournaments and are very good, but aren't maybe considered by the committee as being legitimately up there with whatever the major conference schools or whatever else. And that's typically not true. Like, a lot of these teams that get on that 12 line are actually awesome, right? Like, even some who didn't win, right? Drake was a team I know that I saw this year that was really good and had an opportunity and came very close to pulling off an upset, and they couldn't quite do it. They didn't pull it off against Miami, and Miami's now in the Sweet 16 after beating Indiana. So turns out they were also just good. But like, this happens a lot where you have these 12 seeds who are undervalued. College of Charleston, another one, they really gave San Diego State a tough game. So I think that actually there's a lot of comparison between this 5-12 and the 5-12 that we would get in the college football playoff, because the 12th team in is not going to be a team that the playoff committee rates as the 12th best team in the country. It's going to be the first group of 5 team outs. And one thing that I mention a lot is that I think that there are 3 teams in college football doing stuff that nobody else in the rest of the sport can really match. That's Georgia, Ohio State, and Alabama. And I think that there are going to be years. Now, obviously, something that complicates this is if the loser of Alabama, Georgia is that level and they're the 5 seed. That's probably going to throw a wrench into things. But if we aren't in that situation, I think that there are absolutely times from the start where we could see a 12 seed giving the 5 seed a tough game, because it will be almost every single time that 6th auto bid team, whether it's Cincinnati historically, whether it's Memphis, whether, obviously I guess Cincinnati's going to be a Big 12 team now, but, look around the sport right now. I think that you're talking about a Memphis. I think you're talking about an SMU. I think you're talking about, I'm excited about what UTSA could be in the American Athletic Conference. I think that, we saw Louisiana under Billy Napier turn into a great team. Now it's kind of South Alabama and Troy duking it out. And you don't have to beat Georgia necessarily to beat the 5 seed, right? We're talking about in 2020, Imagine if we got Cincinnati versus Texas A&M. I think that Cincinnati absolutely could have beaten Texas A&M in 2020, right? So I'm not saying that's going to happen every year. I'm not saying that's going to happen. I mean, we don't know if it's going to happen at all, but I absolutely think that a lot of years there will be a 12 seed that can hang with a 5 seed. The one complication will be that a lot of the teams who maybe had a chance to do it, Houston, UCF, BYU, etc., are now in the Big 12. And so, they're not necessarily going to be the 12 seed anymore. But I do think that, again, we're not talking about them beating number one. I don't think that that's something that is even really possible. And we saw what the 1 seed did to TCU this year, and TCU was an awesome team. But I think that there are absolutely matchups that could come about that right from the start, right from early on in this playoff process, that could be competitive right away.
All right, Shehan. So here's putting us both on the spot. I believe that within the first 3 years of the college football playoff, the 12 will beat the 5. Do you agree with that?
I would push it out to 5, but I think that we are in the same mindset. I think we're in the same headspace.
And here's the wrinkle. The wrinkle, as you said, because again, as people know, in the 12-team playoff world, the top 4 seeds, the 4 teams that get buys, you must be a conference champion to do that. So it is possible that Alabama/Georgia, they are going to park in that 5 spot for the foreseeable future. So then it becomes, it's not like beat the theoretical 5. It's beat one of the 2 best programs in the country who has to be the 5 because they both can't be in the top 4. So that actually, I almost wish, could we just let both Georgia and Alabama be in the top 4? Because almost anybody else, and we're going to go through the history in a second here, almost anybody else, you're open to that, right? So how much does it lessen the possibility in your mind? And you talked about it already, knowing that very likely it's going to be that Georgia-Bama non-champ who's sitting there at 5. Well,
and that would have happened last year. Last year, Alabama would have been the number 5 team, and I would not have liked anybody in that match. We got to see them play against Kansas State.
But actually, that's not true. It's not. I wouldn't have been Bama, actually, because TCU wasn't a conference champ.
I guess that's true. And Ohio State, too, wasn't a conference champ.
Yeah. Right. So it was very complicated last year. So it really, I mean, that's the world where, yeah, you can, last year, Kansas State, Clemson would have gotten buys and gotten in a world where they weren't considered for the playoff at all. So it can get hinky. Right. It's going to get hinky in a very interesting way, Shehan. But the point we're making is that either Bama or Georgia has to be playing in that first round every single year, by the way it's set up. And if they're not the 5, maybe they'll be the 6, the 7. But, I mean, it is interesting that the 2 best programs in the country now and for the foreseeable future, no offense to Ohio State, are in the same conference, which complicates it a bit.
No, it is. And honestly, that does change the calculus quite a bit. I would be very curious. I mean, we can't ever actually know the real answer to this question because obviously TCU deserved to be in. Everybody knew that they deserved to be in. They were the clear, obvious number 3 team out of the teams that were competing for the playoff. But if you are in a world where TCU is in the playoff, it's a lock, it's already happening, and you have Ohio State there, and they're also not a conference champion, and you have Alabama there, and maybe the committee just thinks that they're good. Would TCU, who, again, was the highest ranked out of all those teams, would they be guaranteed the 5 spot? I'd be very curious in reality how that would have worked out because it wouldn't matter. It wouldn't be kicking TCU out of the playoff. It would have been for seeding because I think it is completely incomprehensible to have an Alabama versus TCU discussion if it's in versus out. But I don't know. I'm very curious how the committee would have handled it.
The structure will change how people vote. Just like the structure, the creation of the playoff changed how people voted. It changed how people voted in the AP poll. We're going to, and nobody cares about the AP poll. We're going to see the 13 people in that room adapt, Shehan. And you could make the case, well, if that's the case, then how come they didn't put in Alabama ahead of TCU last year? But deserving wins the battle when it's in versus out. Best might win the battle when you're all in, because deserving is about getting in. You deserve to be in. I don't know that anyone's going to pound their fist on the table and say they deserve to be the 5 seed. It's like, well, you can make them the 7. I don't know. It's Bama. Make Bama the 5. So I do think, even though we're just saying, hey, oh, it's going to be Bama, Georgia. Oh, maybe it's not. But now actually it probably is. Because I think they might just park there anyway, because the vote will be different.
No, and it's going to be interesting, right? So I think that obviously we can have the Alabama-Georgia discussion where the loser of that might just park at number 5. I think that realistically, the number 5 in the next couple of years, and football, like thinking about football 10 years or 15 years from now is just a silly proposition. We wouldn't have thought that Georgia would be anything if we did this more than 5 years ago, right? So let's just take for this moment. It's going to either be the loser of Alabama, Georgia, or if there's like one more SEC team that sneaks their way into that contention. Obviously, 2019, we had LSU. We'll see whether Oklahoma can get up to that sort of caliber. Obviously, they're going to be a team competing, for the conference and for national championships at some point. And no, obviously the expanded field means that maybe we might have to talk about Texas on a playoff show when they're competing for that 11th seed, duking it out. So it's going to be super exciting for them, I'm sure. And I think that the other thing that you think about is the loser of Ohio State and Michigan. That's probably going to be the other piece. And frankly, I mean, look, we've talked about it time and time again. Ohio State has lost to Michigan, and Michigan is the program in the Big Ten. I'm going to be very curious, right? Because I think that a 12 seed has a better chance of beating Michigan than it probably does Ohio State, just because of the talent discrepancy. So but I think that it's going to be interesting because in 2021, and I'm not going to sit here and try to redo all of the seeding to where it would have been perfect.
No, I did. You don't have to sit here and do it because I did it. We're going to get there.
Okay. But the team that ended up 5 was Notre Dame. Notre Dame absolutely could have lost to Houston, right? And so I do think that how things actually get seeded is going to make it kind of interesting.
So let's get to the thing, because the discussion I want to have is what makes an upset in this situation more likely? Are we leaning on the strength of the 12s, of these group of 5 12s, or are we leaning on the vulnerabilities of the 5s? Because honestly, in the NCAA tournament, it's the vulnerabilities of the 1s. It is not the strengths of the 16s. It is not like, hey, man, I'll tell you what, you don't want to play Fairleigh Dickinson. They will. It's not that.
Listen, man, they almost beat Merrimack. They almost did it. They almost won their conference tournament. They play a player who's almost 6'7" tall. Almost.
Purdue, as I said, it's like you just got to the point where it's like, did anyone else try this? Triple team the big guy and let the chuckers chuck it, and hey, you can beat them. And the whole Big Ten all year was like, oh man, I don't know, Zach Edey, he's unstoppable. And the Fairleigh Dickinson guy's like, you just triple team him, and they're like, oh, congratulations, Big Ten coaches, on not figuring that out for 3 months. So anyway, I don't, and when you look like Virginia, again, Virginia, vulnerable, just just a weird team that not. And there have been teams that have been close. Other real blue bloods have almost lost as to a 16 or 15, but not really done it. So I don't think the 5, especially when we're talking about a world that it's the second best team in the SEC, it's the second best team in the Big Ten, I don't think they're going to be as vulnerable as Purdue was, for instance, here, or as Arizona. Everybody was like, yeah, Arizona, Princeton's Arizona didn't have a guy who wanted to take over the game. UCLA didn't lose that way. Tommy Hawkins is I'm not letting that happen, right? There are teams that are I'm not letting that. Drew Timme, Gonzaga's I'm not letting that happen, right? So it's certain teams. Arizona didn't have a guy who was willing to do that. So I do think it's going to be more about the 12. So let me ask you this. In the 9 years of the playoff, we have had 6 instances of a classic 12-5 matchup that happened in a New Year's Six Bowl, right? Because we already had the situation where the best group of 5 team has to get in. We had 3 years where that didn't happen. 1 year, Cincinnati got in and was too good. Coastal Carolina should have then sort of slipped in the back door and gotten to play in a New Year's Six Bowl, but they didn't. They were number 12 in the standings, but they didn't get in because Cincinnati was already in. So anyway, that just didn't happen. And the other 2 years, Cincinnati made the playoff, and UCF was an 8 seed 1 year. So it was Cincinnati was too good twice. UCF was too good once. We didn't get the classic 5-12. But 6 times, we got an example, Shehan, of what this is going to look like. Do you want to guess what that 12th seed Of those 6 games, how many times have they won that game in a New Year's Six Bowl?
So I do know that Mike Oresco put out a statement last week saying, well, our teams against the so-called Power 5 are, I think, 4-4 in those games. Obviously, ignoring the fact that I believe all of them are teams that are going to be leaving the conference, that it's not the teams who are staying. So you said it was 8 games, right, that we're talking about, or 12 games?
6 of these classic matchups where
I'd go 2-4.
That simulated a 12. They're 4-2.
4-2. Wow.
They're 4-2. So let's run through this just to set the baseline here. 2014, and this is the rankings, right? But it's like you got to get in. 2014, number 20 Boise State beats number 10 Arizona.
Wow.
Okay. 2015, number 18 Houston beats number 9 Florida State. These are all in New Year's Six Bowls. 2016, number 15 Western Michigan loses to number 8 Wisconsin, but it's a game. It's 24-16.
Yeah, totally.
2017, number 12 UCF beats number 7 Auburn. Okay.
I've heard about that one.
Then 2018 didn't really happen. 2019, number, is it 12 or 17? But Memphis is the team. They lose to number 10's Penn State 53-39, but it's a shootout, man.
Sure.
And then didn't really happen in 20 or 21. And then last year, Tulane beat USC.
Right.
Tulane beat USC that played the Heisman winner quarterback.
Right.
USC didn't roll over. 46-45, number 16 Tulane beats number 10 USC. So they're 4-2, Shehan, wins by Boise, Houston, UCF, and Tulane. That simulate, now, the problem is, which is why it's going to be great when we go to the playoff. They didn't care. The big guys were sad. Whatever. I don't know. They played the games, and the little guys won. Does that give us some history, some example, some precedent to say, yeah, this can happen? Or how much do we take of like, well, I don't know. Because, I mean, Boise State beating Arizona. It's not like Arizona is so blasé about being in a New Year's Six Bowl. They wouldn't show up for it.
No.
Right? They just got beat by Boise State. So what do we think, Shehan? What does that tell us?
No, I mean, I think that one thing that I'd point to, for example, in 2023, we've already had 2 1 seeds lose at this point, Purdue and Kansas. Well, Purdue and Kansas were 8-9 in Ken Palm, right? So, like, I think that this is a good comparison. We have the example of the teams being 1-2, right? When we're talking about Alabama and Georgia. But if you get one of these teams that has a great year, no, I don't think that there's something that that Arizona does that a conference champion from a lower conference couldn't hang with. I don't think that there is anything that, even TCU or even Michigan right now. Again, they got beat in a game against TCU, right? Like, I think that, again, there's absolutely opportunities depending on seeding for this to happen. And like you said, people are going to make excuse about, they didn't want to be there. There were instances where teams were missing some guys, but like you mentioned with USC, this is not a program that had been there the past couple of years. They had the Heisman winning quarterback. The vast majority of players played in this game, and Tulane, a team that is going to continue to be a group of 5 team heading forward, managed to come out and beat them. Like, I think it's absolutely possible.
All right, we're going to run through the history.
Okay.
And again, like, this is not, I actually took this from another site. Somebody else figured it out. I got stuff go. So I assume it's right, but it's about the gist. It's about the vibe. It's about giving an example of what could have been and what will be. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to run through the 9 years of the playoff and say, hey, what might have happened in service of, are we going to see a Fairleigh Dickinson kind of upset in the 12-team college football playoff? We'll do it next on the College Football Survivor Show.
Previously on the College Football Survivor Show.
There is a coach last year that left for a job because he said one of the greatest programs in the history of college football is not a place that he believed he could win at a high level. And actually, now that I said that, I might actually be switching which one I'm picking because there's anger. There's anger. I was originally going to go with LSU Notre Dame. I think I might go with Oklahoma USC instead.
It's the same thing. Oh, which one's angrier?
Well, see, I think that LSU Notre Dame might be a bigger deal, but Oklahoma USC is angrier because Oklahoma is so clearly downgraded. Am I allowed to say that? I'm trying not to say that too loud. I want to make sure they don't hear me. But
I love you. Take both. Take both. I want both.
Catch the latest episode of the College Football Survivor Show wherever you listen to podcasts.
Doug and Shehan back. You can follow us on Twitter at CFB Survivor Show or Shehan Jeyarajah or Doug Lesmerises. All right, 2014. Boise State wound up playing Arizona. You just try to figure it out. What would have been the 5-12? Baylor as the 5, Boise State as the 12. This is angry Baylor, who didn't make the playoff in 2014. This is Bryce Petty, Corey Coleman, Baylor. Jeyarajah, 1,800 rushing yards for Boise State. A real dude. Shehan, Boise State, Baylor. If it would have been the first 5-12 matchup, and I'm glad it's a Baylor question right off the top, because my assumption is that you have immediate recall of every group of 5 team that's been anywhere decent since you were like 12. And also, we apply that to any team in Texas. And frankly, we apply it to all the big time teams around the country also. So I researched all this stuff. And then I was like, I don't know, should I tell? And I was like, nah, Shehan will just know it. But it's Baylor to start. Boise State, Baylor in 2014, that 5-12 game. What do we think? Would have it been a game?
Well, I think first we have to ask, is this going to be a 4-quarter game or is this going to be a 3-quarter game? Because Baylor would have absolutely wiped the floor with them in a 3-quarter game because as far as I know, they didn't know that there was a 4th quarter when they played in postseason games. For people who don't remember, Baylor blew a 14-point, no, it was a 20-point lead. It was a 20-point lead that they had on Michigan State because they basically only threw the ball and couldn't run at all. And it was honestly kind of hilarious. So, but all that to say, I don't necessarily think that Boise State would have been able to take away Baylor's running game to the extent that Michigan State did. So I would have taken Baylor in that game, but I absolutely think Boise State could have hung. I mean, like you talk about, you brought up another kid from Texas, by the way, Frisco's own Jeyarajah. You got to make sure and point that out. But no, I mean, I think that Boise State absolutely could have hung with them. They played Ole Miss earlier in the year and lost 35-13, but that was kind of before they really rounded into form. I think they were playing much better football by the end of the year, and they had a very explosive offense. So I think Baylor would have won, but I do think that it would have been very competitive.
Okay, so we get a competitive 5-12. Yeah. Baylor gets in. Everybody's happy. Okay. Year 2, 2015. Houston beat actual Florida State.
Yeah.
This 5-12 we're setting up is Iowa, Houston.
Oh.
Because Iowa lost the Big Ten championship game that was that was a play-in against Michigan State. They lose in the final seconds. Iowa's the 5 seed. This is Houston. This is Greg Ward, Houston, who goes on to be a receiver in the NFL, but who throws for 2,800 yards, rushes for more than 1,000 yards for Houston. Iowa, this is C.J. Beathard, Iowa. George Kittle, 20 catches for the Fighting Hawkeyes that year. F+ ratings from Football Outsiders. Iowa, overall for the entire season, including what happened in their bowl game, was 35th. They were 5th in the final playoff ranking. They were 35th for the year. Houston was 33rd. The 12 is a better F+ ranking than the 5 seed would be. Iowa is 49th on offense. Congratulations. That's a great year for Brian Ferentz. That's a peak year. 49th on offense. 24th on defense. Houston's 32nd on offense. 46th on defense. Kind of a nice balance there. In the Rose Bowl, Iowa goes to the Rose Bowl and gets destroyed by Christian McCaffrey, who accounts for 368 total yards. I think Greg Ward, Christian McCaffrey's a running back, Greg Ward's a quarterback, would have done a version of the same thing. I'm taking the 12, Shehan, in this matchup in year 2.
Not only am I taking the 12, but like you said, I think it could have potentially been like a bad loss, like a really bad loss. Houston in 2015 was incredible. And actually, do you know who they lost to just like completely ruin their chance? They had a string of 3 ranked opponents in 4 games. Number 21 Memphis, number 15 Navy, number 22 Temple. I think that would have been in the conference championship game. That was Matt Rule's Temple, by the way. And they blew the one in between all of that. Do you know who it was against?
No.
It was against UConn. They lost 20-17 to UConn.
Oh
They just totally were like, well, we're good, right? We're all good. And so like you mentioned, Houston beat Florida State, who finished number 9 heading into the game in the playoff standings. They beat them by 2 touchdowns. So like a real Florida State team, and they handled them handily. I absolutely think that Houston would have won this game. And one other thing too, I did not realize this. Do you know who the offensive coordinator was on that 2015 Iowa team? It was not a Ferentz. I'll say
it was not a Ferentz. Then was it someone related to Hayden Fry?
It was not.
Who was it?
I had no idea that he had a second life. Greg Davis, the former Texas OC, who was basically the entire Mac Brown era, got let go in 2010. I didn't realize that he did anything after Texas, but apparently he went to Iowa and put together some pretty good offenses. But no, I think that Houston absolutely comes out. I think they come out motivated. The other thing too is that, and I'm actually excited to see this now that Tom Herman's at FAU. Like, Tom Herman loves being an underdog. He hates being a favorite. He was the worst favorite that I've ever seen. But as an underdog, that man thrives. And so going into a game against an Iowa team that I don't think anybody really thought was that good, yeah, man, they would have come out with something for him.
That's first year Tom Herman, who had just left Ohio State, where they won the national championship in 2014 with him as the offensive coordinator in New Iowa.
Yep.
So that we got one. We got one upset. I don't even know if it would have been an upset. It would have been like, wow, this 12 seed's favored over the 5 seed.
Gosh, how weird is that 2015 Big Ten schedule, by the way, when you have Iowa versus Michigan State, like, tripping over each other for a chance to get blanked in the playoff?
I mean, it's because the defending national champion couldn't beat Michigan State in the rain to get there. All right, 2016. This is Western Michigan actually lost to Wisconsin.
Yeah.
Okay. This would have been Ohio State, Western Michigan, because this is the Ohio State team that made the playoff as the non-champ of the Big Ten. Right. They were the 3 seed in the playoff without winning the Big Ten. So they would have been. So Penn State, who didn't make the playoff, is in as a bye. Ohio State's the 5 seed. Ohio State, this comes up all the time when Ohio State plays these schools, has only ever once lost to a current member of the MAC. They lost to Akron in 1894. This comes up all the time.
Wait, 1894, did you say?
1894. So they've never lost to a MAC team in the last 125 years. But what they have also done is they've managed to avoid, like, they never played Ben Roethlisberger.
Sure.
Right? They've managed to sort of avoid. So they played Western Michigan in 2015.
Okay.
And then Western Michigan goes nuts in 2016. 2015 Ohio State is all the players back from the national championship team.
Sure.
2016 Ohio State is JT Barrett, Curtis Samuel, and who else can touch the ball? This is Western Michigan with Corey Davis.
Yeah.
Corey Davis, future first-round NFL draft pick at receiver, who has 97 catches for 1,500 yards that year. Ohio State's leading receiver, who's actually a receiver because Curtis Samuel is their entire offense. He's their best running back and their best receiver, but he's not really a receiver, is Noah Brown, who has 32 catches for 402 yards. Corey Davis is 4 times better than any Ohio State receiver. This is the Ohio State team that goes to the playoff and gets shut out by Deshaun Watson and Clemson. They can't score on Clemson, and they can't stop Clemson. This is peak PJ Fleck, a one-time graduate assistant at Ohio State, MAC versus Ohio State, coming into Ohio Stadium to play this game. I don't know, man. Western Michigan didn't beat Wisconsin in the bowl game, but Ohio State didn't do much in its playoff game. I don't know this, but this would have been in the Midwest. This would have been gymundous, Shehan, this 12-5 game.
So, you know, I'm Mr. Group of 5 guy. I do not like the idea of the MAC playing against Ohio State. I just do not like that idea whatsoever. I think that is a horrible matchup from a talent perspective. Now, you mentioned it. They had the best receiver, arguably, I mean, like, maybe the best player on the field in Corey Davis. It would have been a huge deal. I think it would have been a good matchup. At the same time, I don't think they would have been able to hang. I just don't. No, maybe I'm being unfair because like this thing, right? I mean, I think even PJ Fleck doesn't get enough respect right now for the kind of teams that he builds, the way that he recruits, but also just like the structure of his teams. I think that he's really a smart coach. I think that he builds a good culture. Like you mentioned, this was peak Western Michigan, and this was in some ways, 2011 aside, like bottom of the barrel-ish Ohio State in some ways. This was not the best Ohio State team that we saw. The one thing that I think also becomes interesting, though, about this game is let's say that Ohio State does come out and dominate Western Michigan, and I assume we would have played Penn State in the next round. Let's say that were to have happened. Like, does that actually set Ohio State back because they don't hire Ryan Day and they never truly modernize? And that, I think, is also a very interesting question. But no, I think that Ohio State is unfortunately able to kind of take it to Western Michigan. I just don't think it's a good matchup.
The 31-0 loss to Clemson sealed the deal on we need to change the offense for Urban Meyer at Ohio State, but they were headed there anyway. Okay. So, but
fair enough.
But like Ohio State, Western Michigan had a chance to be, the build-up would have been fun at the very least, even if you think the game,
of fun.
I think it might have been potentially competitive. 2017 is the game of all games.
Yeah.
Because what we would have gotten is the two national champs against each other in a 5-12 game. Because this is the year that UCF, Central Florida, goes undefeated and claims a national title. And this is the year that Alabama, not the champ of the SEC, slides in as the 4 seed and then wins the national title. But because they're not the SEC champ, they are the 5 seed here. Bama, UCF, year 4 of the playoff as a 5-12 game. I actually think UCF probably prefers the way that they never had to play Bama. They can just march around and claim a fake title in their own minds rather than ever having to prove it on the field or not. F+ ratings that year, Bama's number 1. UCF is 14. And UCF's offense is actually ranked higher than Bama, 7-8. This is UCF. And here's the thing about this. UCF beat Auburn in the Peach Bowl. Auburn beat Alabama to keep Alabama out of the SEC championship game.
Yes.
So UCF beat Proxy Bama in real life. In this world, they would have gotten real Bama. So I don't know, Shehan, but this is the kind of thing, hype. This 5-12 game would have been like UCF is this 12 seed, thumping its chest. Scott Frost, right? We would have signed up for this.
Oh, absolutely. This would have been amazing. Honestly, the thing that I'm maddest about this playoff is how the hell was UCF the 12? How are they behind Miami and Washington? Like, that makes no sense whatsoever. They absolutely should have been higher than that. Like you mentioned, I think they finished number 8 in the final AP poll or number 7, somewhere in that range. Like, how are they number 12? That's insane. That is like such, UCF can't hang energy when clearly they can. But this would have been, like you said, the game of all games. This is like the game that we would have all been waiting for. UCF absolutely could have hung. I don't know if they beat number 5 Alabama in that case. I think that they matched up a little better versus Auburn than they did versus Alabama that year. But like, I don't think you can watch that Auburn game and say that UCF wouldn't have deserved to be there or couldn't have hung with Alabama. They were really, really good. And this was not one of the better Alabama teams. They ended up winning the title, of course, as they 4 seed, but they were flawed. I mean, remember, this was the year that, I think this was year 2 of Jalen Hurts, and Jalen Hurts was not what Jalen Hurts is now, right? He was a limited passer in a lot of ways. They were a very run-heavy team. I think that they would have struggled with some of the explosive components that UCF brought to the table. So, no, I absolutely think that UCF could have won this game. Again, I think that, like you said, they're probably very happy with their result of getting to kind of beat their chest about it, because one of the great things about college football is the idea of hypotheticals and getting to say, well, we would have done whatever, because we'll never have to find out. But I think this would have been a really good game. I think that UCF absolutely would have had a chance to compete with and maybe beat Alabama. So, like you said, this is like the game that we needed, and I'm excited that we will get it heading forward.
We would have had a month of or 3 weeks of hype of who has the better quarterback, Alabama or UCF. Is it Jalen Hurts or Mackenzie Milton? Right? We would have had
Mackenzie Milton at the time. It was absolutely
so. Then 2018, UCF would have been the 8 seed against Washington. Yeah. So that would have been UCF as a group of 5 team hosting a playoff game in the first round with Washington flying as far as you can fly, catty corner. That just would have been interesting on its own. The 5-12 would have been 5 Notre Dame, 12 Penn State, which is, again, the situations where you make interesting stuff. Between 1981 and 1992, Penn State and Notre Dame played every year. In the last 30 years, they've played twice. They did a home and home in 06 and 07. There's a part that was just, I'm from Pennsylvania originally. That's when I was growing up, and I watched Penn State and Notre Dame play every year. And Penn State was my local team, and my grandfather was a Notre Dame fan. And so, like, Notre Dame and Penn State to me just makes sense. We would have gotten a 5-12 game. So there would have been, it's not the same thing we're looking for here, Shehan, but would we have signed up for Notre Dame, Penn State in a playoff game?
Yeah, no, I think it would have been a lot of fun. I think that Notre Dame probably wins that game pretty easily. That this was a very good Notre Dame team, regardless of what happened against Clemson in the playoff, which was a classic 30-3. But, you know, and I don't think that this was necessarily Penn State's best or most interesting team, but it was a Trace McSorley team, you know, which it always means that a lot of fun is coming. This was a Miles Sanders team at the time. Obviously, he's turned into a really good NFL running back. KJ Hamler was on that team. So, like, again, I think that Notre Dame would have won that game, but also, like, again, we're in a situation now where, like, Penn State absolutely could have hung with Notre Dame. There is a script to where that could have happened. And I think that it will actually be really fun when we do have years. It won't be super common, but I think it will be fun when we do have years where that 12 seed is a power conference team who maybe sneaks their way in, because I think that that does open the door potentially to a lot of chaos and narrative.
All right, 2019, we're getting back to it. 2019, it's on. 2019 would have been 5 seed Georgia and 12 seed Memphis. Now, this is just starting to be. Now, Georgia had made a national championship game before this, but this is not yet the full-throated version of what Georgia is right now. This Georgia team beat Baylor in the Sugar Bowl. This Memphis team lost to Penn State in its bowl game 53-39. 2 NFL running backs on this Memphis team. Antonio Gibson and Kenneth Gainwell. 4 NFL running backs on the Georgia team. DeAndre Swift, James Cook, Zamir White, and Kenny McIntosh is going to be. So this would have been a bevy of ball carriers for this game, Shehan. F+ ratings, again, this is from Football Outsiders, combines a couple different things. It's better than just going by raw stats. F+, Georgia is the number 5 team in the country. Memphis is number 19. Georgia has the number 2 defense. Memphis has the number 8 offense. So we're going to see this again. Memphis goes 39 on Penn State. They're not going 39 on Georgia, but we would have got a little test here, Shehan. And again, it's not full-throated Georgia yet. What do you think? This Memphis team, could they have done something?
One of the greatest, like, injustices in the history of college football, which it's not really, but whatever, I'm going to call it that, is that we only really got to see Kenny Gainwell play 1 year at Memphis. Like, we did not get to see him explode because he ended up sitting out the COVID year and then entering the draft. And now he's turning into, again, a really good NFL player with the Philadelphia Eagles. But this team was loaded offensively. Like you mentioned, a couple of NFL running backs when you got Kenny Gainwell, Antonio Gibson. Rodriguez Clark is another player who is their number 1 running back right now, who is a big-time player. Patrick Taylor was a really good player for them. At receiver, again, these aren't necessarily guys who have turned into awesome NFL players, but DeMonte Coxey was somebody as both a receiver and as a returner who was just dynamic, just so dynamic as a college football player. Calvin Austin, who is somebody who people might know if they followed college football the past couple of years, was on this team. Joey Magnifico is a tight end who I would say is maybe one of the most underrated tight ends we've had in the group of 5 over the past couple of years. So, like, they've got weapons, and they've got a quarterback in Brady White, who, by the way, won the Campbell Trophy as the academic Heisman because he started his PhD program while he was at Memphis, because that's just, I don't know, that's the thing that happens. Point is, I'm a big fan of this Memphis team. I think that they absolutely could have moved the ball. This is one of my favorite group of 5 teams that we've had in a long time. Now, there is absolutely a world where Georgia just sits on them. I mean, we saw, I got to see it up close and personal. Baylor played Georgia in the Sugar Bowl, and like halfway through the first quarter, it's like, oh man. Like, it wasn't even that they were going to destroy them. It was just that it was like nothing was going to happen. Absolutely nothing was going to happen in that game because Georgia was just going to stop Baylor from being able to do literally anything. I think that Memphis actually probably had a better offensive line that year than Baylor did. The dirty little secret about Matt Rule Baylor is that their offensive line was always terrible, and that continued for a couple years until they made some hires. So I think that Memphis could have put up some points. I think they could have been exciting. Like you mentioned, they did end up losing that game against Penn State, but it was a shootout in the Cotton Bowl, I believe it was. And so, I do think that they would have been able to move the ball. I'm taking Georgia to win the game, but I mean, man, they would have been a lot of fun. And I think that we didn't necessarily have the team that challenged Georgia down the field and side to side in that kind of way until we saw them play Ohio State last year. And like you said, this was not the best version of Georgia. It was a very good version of Georgia. But I think that Memphis would have been able to move the ball with some regularity, even if it did ultimately end with them losing the game.
Did anyone have a bet on, does Shehan have 5 minutes on 2019 Memphis, just off the top of his head?
It's such a good team. It's such a good team.
Did you doubt him? Did anyone doubt him? Hey, Doug did 9 hours of research. Shehan, you got could you go half an hour on 2019 Memphis just from memory? Oh, yeah, no, I got it. I got a whole thing about Joey Magnifico.
That's why I remembered the names, but I knew exactly, I knew what to do with it.
You got that Joey Magnifico take just holstered, ready. Just Doug, whenever you need it.
There's actually a story too, because again, this is me. So Joey Magnifico never got a shot at the league. I think he got to play in the XFL, but he's actually a high school coach now in Memphis because his NFL dreams never really fully materialized. He was a great player though. I remember back in 2019, Memphis played SMU. This was the year that SMU broke out and had their first 10-win season since 1983. And it was such a good game. I think Game Day went to that game at Memphis. That's going to be a team that I remember for a long time.
For the people who can't see Shehan, which is everybody, that last minute on Joey Magnifico, he was looking off into the distance wistfully. He didn't quite go, Joey Magnifico, but visually he did. I got to see that.
You're not joking.
That's what we were denied by not having a 12-team playoff. All right, 2020, I think this is right. So Coastal Carolina is Coastal Carolina in 2020. But because Cincinnati makes the playoff and goes and plays Georgia.
This was not their playoff year, by the way. This was the year that but the New Year's Six.
They take the New Year's Six and play that game against Georgia, not in the playoff. I apologize. It's building up to Cincinnati's playoff the next year. But it means Coastal Carolina doesn't get in a New Year's Six. But I think, if I have it, I think they were 12th. Anyway, I think they might have been the 12 seed in a 12-team playoff. So we're going to go with that because we're creating these ideas anyway. And it would have been Notre Dame. So we're getting Coastal Carolina, Notre Dame, maybe, potentially, in 2020. What does that look like? F+ ratings? Coastal Carolina, 11, Notre Dame, 12. All right, so again, Coastal Carolina is going to be favored over Notre Dame. This is a Coastal Carolina team that's undefeated. They lose in the Liberty Bowl. No, they lose not in the Liberty Bowl. They lose to Liberty in a bowl. They lose to some mortgage bowl. They lose to Liberty. Notre Dame goes to the Rose Bowl and gets pretty rolled by Bama in a playoff semifinal, 31-14. So Coastal Carolina, this was the rise of Coastal Carolina in 2020. 8th best offense in the country by F+ ratings. Coastal Carolina give Notre Dame a game here, Shehan, in this 5-12?
So I will give you the context of that. So the Pac-12 would not have made the playoff as one of the top 6 conferences this year because their champion was actually Oregon, who finished number 26, and not as the 6th team, but not as the 7th, because the Mountain West champion, San Jose State, was also ranked ahead of them. There was some weirdness where I believe Washington was supposed to have gotten in, but then they had a COVID outbreak. So Oregon maybe wouldn't have necessarily have been that team. I believe they played USC that year in the title game. So point is, yes, this would have been the number 6 team, Coastal Carolina, as a second group of 5 conference getting in over the Pac-12. And yeah, absolutely, they could have beaten Notre Dame. Are you kidding me? Coastal Carolina was so good that year. I'm not going to go on as much of a rant about them as I am about Memphis, because I think that also we remember how exactly good they were with Grayson McCall. But yeah, I mean, this was a really, really good Coastal Carolina team. They're, they have such a creative offense, that I think that a lot of power conference teams have struggled against. You saw them play against BYU earlier that year. That was the game. That was the anytime, anywhere, any place game against Zach Wilson, and they managed to pull off that victory. Like you said, they play in the bowl game. They lose in overtime in the Mortgage Cure Bowl. Cool, whatever. One of the great injustices, because this is an injustice show, I guess, this episode, is that, like, if you're a group of 5 team and you don't make the New Year's Six, then they just waste your absolute time. Like, the drop off is insane. Yeah. To go from maybe playing in the Cotton Bowl to playing in the Cure Bowl is just like, that feels impossible. That is so, because
all
wild.
Those other bowls have the conference affiliations, like the Citrus Bowl or the Outback Bowl or all these, the Holiday Bowl, like all the ones that are still kind of cool, they're locked into 2 conferences. So if you're Coastal Carolina, you're in a New Year's Six or you're in nothing.
Yeah, it absolutely sucks. We need to get Joe Biden on the horn, man. We got to get him to figure this thing out. But and the way that they lost, by the way, was they lost to an NFL quarterback, Malik Willis, who rushed for 4 touchdowns in the Cure Bowl. So, like, it's not like their loss was bad either. This was the year before Malik Willis kind of blew up and obviously got taken really high and earned Hugh Freeze the Auburn job. So that's a thing that happened. But so Coastal Carolina, really, really good team. I would have loved to see them versus Notre Dame. I think that they do some things, especially on the edges, that Notre Dame's defense would have struggled with. So, yes, I am 100% in for this game.
All right, so that leads us to 2021, where, again, Cincinnati makes the actual playoff. So we're not getting that classic 12 matchup. But you know what we would have gotten in a 5-12? Georgia would have been the 5 because Georgia did not win the SEC. And all we want, right? What do we want against Georgia? We want to see somebody who can challenge this great Georgia defense. You know who we would have gotten in the 12? Kenny Pickett, Jordan Addison, and Pitt.
Really?
Does that work for you?
Wow.
Yeah. But instead, like Kenny Pitt, like they don't play in their bowl game.
Right.
Pitt winds up playing Michigan State in a bowl game where like neither Kenneth Walker nor Kenny Pickett plays. So we get this world where we wanted to see that Ohio State passing offense against Georgia in 2021. We had to wait till 2022. We would have taken Kenny Pickett and Jordan Addison. And then meanwhile, Cincinnati would have had a bye as a 3 seed and then probably would have gotten Notre Dame in the next round as the 6, a repeat of a game from the regular season. That wouldn't have been as cool. So this is not quite the same thing, Shehan, but Georgia Pitt, we don't have to spend a lot of time on it. It's something we could have seen. We didn't, which takes us to 2022. And the idea that we would have gotten TCU Tulane, that TCU makes the national title game, but are we setting up a scenario here? I don't want to say they're in trouble, but challenged by Tulane in round 1, a Tulane team that actually beat USC. What would TCU Tulane have been like?
I think it would have been a lot of fun. I think TCU does end up winning relatively easily. I think that their defense matches up a lot better with what Tulane does than what Georgia did. They do not match up well at all with what Georgia does. But it would have been a fun game. I mean, certainly we saw that Tulane was a program and a team capable of taking down a super talented team. We saw that against USC. So, no, this would have been a good game. It would have been a lot of fun. And absolutely I would have signed up for it, even if I think that TCU would have won.
So let's learn these lessons. Let's absorb all this history and come back and figure out what does all this mean for the future of college football and the upsets that we want. Next on the College Football Survivor Show.
The College Football Survivor Show, where playoff survival is always on the line.
Talking Shehan back. So Shehan, I really have evolved my thinking on a lot of this stuff. And I think it is in part because we started the 4-team playoff and I liked it at the time. I always used to say I'd rather have good teams left out than bad teams left in. I really have not been much of a group of 5 admirer. I think they just take up space, whatever. What are we doing? And over the course of this, probably 3 years ago, I kind of came all in on the 12-team playoff. We've got to get to the 12-team playoff. But even this exercise, I guess I should have realized it before. But even you, as somebody who comprehensively covers college football from 1 to, what is it going to be now? 133?
I think we're at 133 right now, yeah, because Jacksonville State and Sam Houston are moving up this year.
Yeah. So even that, when I said, what's the record of these classic 12s? in these games. You guessed 2 and 4. You were surprised to hear it's 4 and 2 that it's been that good. So I think our loyal, dedicated, educated college football audience who cares about the playoff, who cares about college football year round, who listens to this podcast, I think some of these people listening, right? You're out there listening. Were you surprised by 4 and 2? And what did 4 and 2 do for you as you think about this? I would have, even as I embraced the 12-team playoff, Shehan, I think I may have been in a place where I was like, well, at 5-12, you got to suffer through it to get all the other good stuff you want. I don't know if we're going to be suffering, man. And does college football need this aspect of it? The best part of March Madness is the underdogs. College football doesn't have that. Now, you can look at individual circumstances, right? Ohio State versus Miami in 2002, right? Like there's individual moments where you can find, hey, this team was really favored or whatever. But we're not talking Fairleigh Dickinson. We're not talking St. Peter's. We're not talking Princeton. Does college football need that, Shehan? What would it do for college football to create this world where Memphis and UCF and Houston, well, not Houston anymore, they're moving, Tulane, these group of 5 teams can have a chance to claim that underdog mantle?
So heading into this playoff expansion, there were 2 things that I want, and I guess they really boil down to one thing. And it's that I want there to be stakes to the sport that aren't just winning the national championship. We shouldn't leave the season and say only one team deserves the right to be happy about what happened to their team this season. And I think that we've kind of set that up with the way that we do this, right? Because, in the past, maybe like the idea of being one of the top 2 playing in the BCS was so impossible that people didn't really take it that seriously. But then like 4 is close enough that you have this impossible dream, but not actually close enough that anybody can actually achieve it. And it puts so much focus on just who has the trophy on that final stage. The thing that I like about the 12-team playoff, there are 2 parts. One, it incentivizes winning conference championships, which I think matters. I think that it is a cool thing that you get a reward, that it is easier, that you have a better path to winning a national championship if you win your conference. Like the fact that, that Georgia back in 2021 got destroyed in their conference championship game and it cost them essentially nothing. That's not that exciting to me, right? I think that devalues the idea of actually winning the SEC. And I think that it's cool to win the SEC. I think that, I've said it before. I think that football at its core is a regional sport that is nationalized. And I think that keeping at least that little bit of it does help things. And the other part of it, too, is that, nobody watches March Madness and says, well, it's cool that Fairleigh Dickinson beat Purdue, but like, can they win the title? Can they beat everybody all the time? And that's just such a dumb way to think about college football too. Now, again, there's less teams, it's closer together. Like I understand why there's a little bit more reversion to that. But like people did this with TCU. People were like, oh, well, they beat Michigan. TCU won a playoff game, but who cares? They lost to Georgia. They're not that good. Like TCU, this school with 10,000 kids in Fort Worth, played in the national championship game. That's pretty fun. That's pretty exciting. I understand what happened in that game. And if you ask me, will TCU ever win a national championship ever again? I'd probably say no. But like, so why are you mad at them for accomplishing something, for going through the regular season 12-0 and having a shot in the playoff and beating the Big Ten champion who was the number 2 seed on the board and having a chance to play for a national title? It is so dumb to me that we view that as a failure to then go and get beat by Georgia. And obviously there's always going to be, well, you were this close to a title, you don't know if you'll ever be there again. But like they played in the national title game. We should view that as a success. And I think that when we expand the field, and especially I actually do love this idea of the 5-12 instead of a 16-1, for example, where you just get fed right to Georgia, because I do think that it creates the opportunity for at least competitive games and sometimes upsets. So I love every part of this. I think that this does help the sport because I think that it forces you, I think it changes the incentive structure to where you do have to pay attention to more of the sport. We created this because we, this podcast, because we felt like we were heading into a world where, hey, you're competing to be one of 12 teams, and that opens the sport dramatically versus saying, well, are you Georgia? You're not Georgia? I don't know if we need to talk about you, right? It just completely changes the sports.
college football does have upsets right now. College football does not have Cinderellas.
Yeah.
And that's what this opens the door for. Because as you said, March Madness Cinderellas are not about winning the national championship. They're more often than not about winning one game. And and you made a really good point off the top, I think we set this up very well to pat ourselves on the back. One point is, listen, Houston, Cincinnati, UCF, 3 of the teams that have been most set up to be these kind of 12s aren't going to be these kind of 12s anymore because they're going to the Big 12. So they can't be this little 12. Oh, that's good. They're going to the Big 12, so they can't be a little 12. So, but do we have enough teams like this in the sport with Coastal Carolina, with Boise State, with Tulane, with Memphis, with schools like that to give an opportunity where that 12 seed is going to have enough juice to really do it? Yes. Yes, I think we will. Now, we also set up, hey, that 5, be on the lookout. A lot of times it might be Georgia, Alabama, Ohio State, Michigan. Be on the lookout for that. That's going to make it more difficult. But Shehan, when it happens, I think college football needs this. And I think you made a great point. College football is stuck right now on national title or bust. And when you invite in Cinderella, she changes everything. She changes the context for everyone. So maybe Memphis or Coastal Carolina or Tulane won't win that 12-5 game for a while, but even by being there, by playing a tough game, maybe it makes that 10-7 game. The 10 beating the 7, maybe the 10 feels better about that. And then you go lose in the next round, but it's okay. Maybe that 8-9 game, there's a lot of juice to it. Maybe you'll go get pounded by number 1, but hey, that was a big deal to win that first round game and get to the quarterfinal. We don't have enough of that, especially in opt-outs for bowls, which I understand why players do it, but I don't think players will opt out of the playoff. So these wins will really matter. They'll be legitimate. There'll be no excuses. And it will allow everyone to value something that right now is not valued. Your point about TCU is immense. Really, truly, I think national college football, they look at, man, TCU didn't even belong there, as opposed to TCU made the national title game. I don't know that people, when they think about Butler basketball, they don't go,
what a failure.
2 straight years.
Oh, my gosh.
They didn't even win.
He missed
Oh, my God. Gordon Hayward didn't even make that half-court shot. What's wrong with you, Butler? That was Duke. How dare you? No, that's not what they do. We need that for this sport, Shehan. And structure changes context, and context changes feelings. It's going to be the same sport. They're going to be a little bit fewer plays because they're going to change the clock. But it's the same sport, right? 10 yards for a first down, right? You're drinking Gatorade on the sideline. All that stuff's going to be the same. But I do think this is going to open minds in buildings for teams and coaches and players and for fans. Shehan, maybe, and even we don't have to get a Fairleigh Dickinson right away. But even the pursuit of is it Farley? I always get confused, to be honest here.
I think.
You read Super Fudge? Did you read Super Fudge? Everybody reads Super Fudge, right? Or is that only my generation?
No,
Did you
I
read the
that.
Fudge book?
Yeah.
Farley Drexel Hatcher. His name's Farley Drexel Hatcher. But they call him Fudge, Peter's little brother, right? Everybody knows Fudge. So it's hard for me to not call him Farley Dickinson, because also that family, the Drexel Hatchers, the Hatchers, they lived on the East Coast. They lived in New York. So it's in the same area. So when I hear Fairleigh Dickinson, I assume is it a Revolutionary War general named Fairleigh Dickinson? It's got to be, right? But I think of Fudge. And spoiler alert, Fudge ate Peter's turtle right in the beginning of the first book. He ate his turtle. Unbelievable. How could a person eat a turtle? So then he got a dog named Turtle. A child ate a turtle. It was like, 6 pages in. What's happening in this book? A kid ate a turtle. Oh, great. Let's make a series out of it. That's what when I was 9, I was like, yep, that turtle eating kid, that's my guy. So that's what I think of with this team that beat Purdue. I think of Farley Drexel Hatcher. So I apologize. Farley, college football needs it. Right? There's some weird stuff with the sport right now, Shehan. NIL and transfer portal and all this kind of stuff. You know who can solve a lot of those problems? Cinderella. Let's get it to college football. It's going to happen.
Yeah, one thing that I'll mention too is that, well, actually 2 things that I'll mention. First of all, this is credit to our friend Nicole Auerbach from The Athletic. Apparently, because she's apparently from Jersey. I didn't actually know that until she tweeted this. But apparently, Fairleigh Dickinson is known for being a party school. and their nickname for a long time was Fairly Ridiculous University because of how much they partied. So I hope that they enjoyed this real good. I hope that they lived up to their reputation. But the other thing I was going to say that's a little more relevant is I think that this changes the way that we think about the sports, because I think that, again, we have this idea of these three teams that I keep talking about, and they're just massive advantages, and what they're doing is just different than everybody else. And I think that this helps clarify some of that, and I think this helps change some of that. You know, one stat that I think is really instructive to who can actually compete for titles is the blue chip ratio done by a colleague of mine over at CBS Sports and 247, Bud Elliott. And Alabama's blue chip ratio in 2022 was 89%. Like, we are getting to the point where if you're a blue chip player, it's almost like dumb not to consider one of those three schools first and foremost. It's almost dumb to be like, well, what school do I like best? Where would I like to go? Right? We saw this with that offensive lineman from Iowa. I can't remember his name right at the second, but I think Caden Proctor, what was the kid's name?
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah, Caden Proctor, this offensive lineman from Iowa, who like would have been this game-changing, exciting in-state commitment, who could have, just really would have made everybody excited. And then he's like, well, I probably have to go to Alabama. Like, I probably need to like put myself in the best position possible to be seen and developed and all this sort of stuff. And it's like, man, that sucks. That like a kid who wanted to go to Iowa was like, this probably isn't a smart decision for me. I should probably go to Alabama. And Iowa puts out linemen, by the way. Jedrick Wills, pretty good player. Like, they put out linemen. And so I think that hopefully this changes the way in some ways that we think about sports, because we see this in college basketball sometimes. We saw Chet Holmgren go to Gonzaga, a school that's been really good, and say, I want to make it great. I want to compete for titles, and I want to elevate Gonzaga. We saw Keontae George go to Baylor, right? I mean, obviously Baylor won a title in 2021, but these are some of the best players in the entire country saying, I want to try to elevate this program, and I think it's possible to do it. I think that we change the way that we think about the sports when we do open this world up. And the other thing too is we got a little bit of a sneak preview of what this could look like this year. And that's with TCU, because, and this goes back to before the playoff a little bit, we did have sort of a Cinderella run, if you count the regular season too, where this guy who nobody had heard of outside of me, because I covered him for 4 years, named Max Duggan, all of a sudden becomes this like beloved household superstar, and nobody's watching him and like, wow, he's going to have this great career and he's clearly better than Bryce Young and CJ Stroud. No, that's not the bar. That's not what anybody should be thinking or caring about, right? But he goes on this individual run. He has this individual performance that I think college football fans will remember for a long time because of what he did. And he's probably not going to play very much in the NFL. He might not be in the NFL for a very long time. But who cares? He made us feel something during a run to the college football playoff and to the national championship game. And I think that we will have even more moments like that coming in a 12-team playoff field.
I think this was one of our best podcasts because I think we changed hearts and minds here, Shehan. We didn't change college football because it was already changing, but I want people to realize it. I want people to realize that this great sport can be better. And all it takes is a twist of the structure, a shift of the context, and everybody opening their hearts and minds to what success means. And in a world where we have nationalized a regional sport, we can still find a way for people not to live in a national championship or bust world. And it's not just for the Cinderellas, but it's for Alabama and Georgia and Ohio State and Michigan and Florida State and Texas and Oregon and everybody. Because there's a way to succeed without, as you said early in this podcast, there should be more than one team that's happy. And I always thought that the bowl structure did that. Hey, you get to go on vacation and win a bowl game. But the bowl structure really for the best teams has started to ring hollow because guys opt out, because we think about the playoffs so much. But a playoff victory or even getting in is really going to change. Or even being in the discussion, oh, we just missed out on making it. We were the 14th best team in the country. Right now, you could be the 14th best team in the country and not be all that happy. Now maybe it's like, hey, man, we were in the playoff discussion all year. So I think this is going to be good for the sport. We appreciate you guys making the College Football Survivor Show part of your week. We hope we're guiding you through. We're getting you excited about this playoff world. As Shehan said, we're doing this. We started this pod because, like, hey, they're going to do a 12-team playoff. Then we're like, no, we're not. We're like, oh my gosh, we already started the playoff. We started the pod. We can't go back now. And then it's like, oh, they just delayed it for a little bit. So one more year of the 14 playoff, then we'll be to 12. Make sure you're reading Shehan at cbssports.com for now. For Shehan Jeyarajah, I'm Doug Lesmerises, and that was the College Football Survivor Show.
The College Football Survivor Show, where playoff survival is always on the line.